though, because it's the different one. It's like
showtime.
It's not the one. Cool. Drew, real quick, on the page broadband.money for the event, it's not actually up and running.
There's a 30-second delay.
It's up now.
From now it's recording. Now we're live.
Okay. And then it flipped over to that video unavailable thing. So can we go in and flip that back real fast?
Yes, I will do that now.
Sweet. It's so strange that it does that. I'm checking it. People might be able to actually hear. I don't know, but
it's been saved. Showtime.
All right. Cool. Hey, folks, I think that we're live. I don't know. You know, between the latency and all the gadgets that we're trying to use to make this awesome event, you know, I don't know necessarily if we're live or not, but anybody that has my info to contact me, if there's a problem, let me know. Otherwise, we're just gonna roll because we have some amazing questions here, and we're here with Corey. It's a real honor to be with you, Corey. You founded LTD. You're known as the boy who won $1 billion for broadband, and you know we got a ton of questions, and there are some really great questions from a lot of folks, and there are more questions coming in, it seems. So we're gonna go get started. But Corey, I have a really important question for you that's not listed in the event yet, and it's how do you say your last name? Because I've read it in a ton of places, but I've never actually heard it said. Yeah. So
it's just like the hockey skate, Bauer, the hockey equipment brand, Hauer. So
Hauer. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Corey, it's really a pleasure to have you. Thank you for making time. I know you're busy getting folks connected at LTD and doing all kinds of awesome stuff to get broadband out to lots of parts of the United States. So, you know, thank you for making time. And you know, here we're with Ask Me Anything series at Broadband Money. We had a couple of amazing events, one with Peggy Schaefer from Maine, one with Craig Settles, who's a telehealth pioneer. We have one upcoming January 14th with Scott Woods, who's a director at the NTIA, absolute visionary and hard worker, getting folks connected in minority communities. So, you know, please make time for that. But that's my shout out. You know, folks, welcome. Last check, there were over 130 folks that had RSVP'd. So we want to, you know, say hello and thank you to all of you. I really appreciate it. But Corey, let's go ahead and get started with it. I have a quick question for you though. You started LTD. When did you start?
So the LTD is my second rodeo in rural
Gotcha.
Internet service, but I started that in 2010 in southern Minnesota, which is where I grew up.
Well, awesome. And I'm curious too, Corey, like, I know there's a lot about you and your winnings from the public limelight of, you know, the sort of spotlight that was put on you and you won such a massive award in this recent auction. But I'd love for you if you could tell the folks on the call, like, you know, why did you start LTD? And what were you trying to do? You know,
well,
were you trying to win a bunch of grant money?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. And, you know, I really enjoy the WISPA industry events, meeting up with other operators and kind of figuring out their origin stories too. And our origin story is a little different because I had some previous experience doing telecom in rural areas at another company. But a lot of the operators I run into at these events, I think their common theme is they live in rural nowhere, they can't get broadband, they're techie, and they know a way to fix it. And so, you know, I've run into hundreds of operators that have done that in rural areas throughout the US. You know, I guess the difference with us is, you know, I started this company, I was able to recruit people from my last company, but also from other areas where I knew I'd be able to get talent. And, you know, we focused on areas that were unserved and underserved. I mean, that was really the genesis of the company is going where we knew we were going to win. I mean, our very first community that we served was a small town called Rose Creek, Minnesota. And it's interesting, the incumbent phone company was CenturyLink, and they had a 24 port DSLAM. So they could serve 24 people with DSL service in that small town. Well, there's a lot more than 24 homes. So there was a years long waiting list hoping someone would cancel their DSL so someone else could get it. And obviously we knew that there would be built-in demand on day one, and we crushed it on day one and signed up everybody that had been waiting. And then everybody else who didn't really know they needed broadband yet discovered that they did need broadband. And so
Right.
we grew geographically as quickly as we could get equipment and get things installed in rural areas surrounding there.
Nice, Corey. Thank you. And in our prep session, you mentioned that also when you got started, you even drove around. One of the things I was really struck by is you drove around and knocked door to door in country roads.
I've eaten a lot of gravel dust.
Yeah, I mean,
thousands of miles of rural areas.
Okay.
And it's interesting that having conversations with farmers and people living in rural areas, and really discovering that they need it. They know they need broadband. They don't know how to get it. They can be angry about them not getting it, and that's about the extent of it. I mean, you can call a politician and sort of complain, "Hey, how come we can't get broadband in our township?" And
right.
We really took the approach that, hey, we can solve this. Let's go solve this at scale. And so we went, from one tower site in 2010 to over 2,500 tower sites today, just by having those conversations and driving down gravel roads and finding structures and building them out.
Okay, so you've been at it for a while, and you didn't start it with the intention to win $1 billion of grant money. So we're gonna have some questions about sort of how you were able to achieve that later, and how you're gonna do all the wonderful things that you have to do in order to put that grant money to good use. But I'm going to dive into the questions, and folks, if you have any more questions, pile them on top. I'm going to start at the bottom and roughly go in the order of number of likes. There are some great questions. You probably have to hit the load more comments button in order to see them. But if you have any questions, I'll be refreshing the page, and our friend Drew Clark from Broadband Breakfast is on the call. He's on standby. He's sort of coaching me to try to become a video cast MC, and and he's there as kind of training wheels in case the wheels start to fall off for me doing it. So Drew, if you see any questions come in, let me know. Okay. But I have an initial question here from Ahmed, and it says, how do you make fixed wireless stable, and then what's your approach to engineering for failure conditions?
That's a great question. I love it, and it's an engineering question. So you really can dial in the performance of your equipment to handle snow, rain, sleet. In terms of weather, you can engineer in power redundancy, which is probably the largest issue in WISP networks. And this is something that's fresh in my mind. In Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska, in the last 2 days, we've been recovering from a massive December windstorm, including several tornadoes. Literally the first tornadoes to occur in December in Minnesota history. And so, our crews are, filling generators where battery backups have been exhausted. And, that in operating a large fixed wireless network like we operate, we cover roughly 50,000 square miles. I can tell you that power is the biggest issue we face. Just the stability of the electrical grid itself is probably the biggest thing. And that's one of the good things, is you can solve that with money. You can throw bigger batteries at it and standby generators. And so you can engineer with a well-capitalized wireless network. You engineer in additional stability and additional redundancy. The other thing too is people talk about fixed wireless. It's never just fixed wireless. It's hybrid network. So we utilize fiber, and we're pushing fiber deep into our networks to give us additional capacity. And obviously, with our RDOF awards, we're planning on doing tons and tons of fiber. I mean, that's to the extent in places where we still will utilize fixed wireless, the depth of fiber into our network will offer additional stability. Think of a wireless link where you could have a tower hit by a tornado, which happened to us. We had a tower hit by a tornado. We're engineering and building a new site today to replace the damaged site, but fiber can get.
This just happened.
This just happened. Yeah, that's happening right now.
Oh, geez.
Right now we have crews on a site in rural Iowa that are I got the pictures of the site flattened like a pancake. So imagine 100-foot grain leg just folded over in someone's farm place. Yeah, I mean, thankfully, no loss of life. We don't know of anybody that was killed in the storm. So we can fix networks, we can fix wireless infrastructure, and we're doing that. But
yeah, spot on. Yeah, I grew up in the Midwest. I remember tornadoes vividly, and I don't know, which is scarier, is more, or how dependent we've become on broadband, and how many people still need access to broadband right now, or December tornadoes. Because that in itself is kind of strange. But so switching gears a bit, you've talked a little bit about, like, Ahmed's question is about wireless, and people hear wireless, and me personally, I'm a huge fan of fiber, but I'm also a huger fan of get the job done now, right? And so in our conversation preparing for this, you had mentioned several times like about this hybrid concept, and Drew has questions about fiber. Like, there's a bunch of really good questions coming in about fiber, and you started as not fiber, but you've always incorporated fiber into your networks, and you're talking about this hybrid thing. Like, can you say a bit more about it? And we'll go to Drew's question next. Which, what percentage roughly are you thinking about your RDOF winnings are going to go towards fiber versus how much of it is going to go to wireless in its various forms?
Yeah, so our plans for RDOF are fiber. We're going to continue to invest in wireless infrastructure. In non-RDOF areas, but in the RDOF areas, our plans are for fiber. And one of the it's interesting. I talk to a lot of politicians and stakeholders at various levels of government, and there's a perception that wireless is unreliable, and I think a lot of that is driven sort of by our cell phones, right? That we are accustomed to driving through areas where our calls drop, or we're maybe with 1 bar of signal. And circling back to Ahmad's question, a well-engineered network shouldn't be giving somebody 1 bar of signal at the end. Like, you build additional towers. I mean, you should be living in 5 bars of signal land. And so engineering a stable wireless network, quite honestly, the answer is engineer it for 5 bars of signal. And that's a non-technical term for the actual signal strength numbers that we use to engineer networks. But the bottom line is you can invest in enough towers and enough equipment to get 5 bars into the nooks and crannies. The other thing, and this circles back to your fiber question. So wireless internet companies in general, we have a problem where people call us up and they say they want service, but they can't get it. And the reasons they can't get it are the same. They either live in a deep valley where you can't get wireless signal down to them, or they live in the middle of a forest where you can't get wireless signal to them. So those are the two killers of being able to deliver broadband via fixed wireless, easily solved by fiber. We can go down into the valley and follow 16 poles, lay 16 poles of fiber to get to everyone in that valley. And in fact, that's what we do every day in the areas where we're building fiber today. And there's some, we are building fiber in some hoots and hollers in Tennessee that hoots and hollers. I had to learn what a holler was, but
I knew what a holler was.
Yeah, they talk.
What the hell is a hoot?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe somebody can answer that in the AMA chat. I don't know, but I know.
If we have any listeners, Yeah. Well, okay. But you're getting both hoots and hollers connected in.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
Contingency and beyond.
but
Okay,
but
good.
fiber is like the tool for that. And if you look at our RDOF award areas, it's the places that didn't get served. I mean, by definition, the RDOF locations are quite rural and low density and hard to get to with other technologies like fixed wireless. So the maps that show unavailability of 25x3, there's a lot of discussion about mapping and how maybe the maps aren't accurate. And
Yeah.
I mean, that's not an AMA question, but I do think that perfect is the enemy of good in terms of mapping. And I think the FCC did the best job they could with mapping using the data they had. But I think that if you look at the mapped areas, not just of LTD's RDOF award areas, but RDOF in general, there's a lot of terrain out there that isn't going to be served well with fixed wireless. And not discounting my colleagues. I mean, there's other companies that proposed building fixed wireless at the gigabit profile. I know NextLink, Resound, Etheric, GeoLinks. I'm not here to naysay those guys. If they can do it, I think they can do it. I think the technology exists, but I think we're inclined to build fiber for our RDOF areas.
Awesome. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is, you started off with wireless and you're going in this hybrid and you're not against fiber and you actually enjoy fiber. So let me get into a couple of more questions about, that specifically in scaling, right? Knowing that there are things like supply chain constraints going on and, a shortage of folks, right? And so you have 15 states that you're going to go and, pull fiber and run fiber in, over the next few years. So I'd love to hear from you about some of Sarah's questions. First is, how are you going to find she calls it manpower. I think we're supposed to say people power now, the person power to build the networks. Like, how are you going to find those persons? Yeah.
Well, I don't want to give too many of the secret sauce answers to that. We have some good pipelines of people that are going to be able to do the types of pole attachment work that we are going to need to do and some of the underground work. But I think there's, pretty wide understanding. There's going to be a lot of broadband projects constructed over the next 10 years. And I think that, this isn't going to be we go recruit these guys away from XYZ Construction Corp or ABC Construction Corp. I think this is going to be creating new jobs, maybe from other trades. We view this as a large construction project.
Reskilling.
Yeah, I mean, that's, nothing wrong with being a carpenter. It's a great trade, but arguably, if you're a carpenter, you have a lot of the skills that could be applied to installing broadband infrastructure and probably at a better wage. I have friends that are union carpenters and they make a good wage, but if they were building fiber networks, they would make a better wage. So I think that's part of our inclination is to create and train professionals to install fiber networks. I think that's, and I think, it's interesting. The Windstream CEO is sort of probably doesn't see eye to eye with me in a lot of ways, but we do agree in this way that he's hiring 1,000 self-perform fiber installation folks, and we think that's a path. I think that the reality is that at the scale that we're going to be building, we're going to need many hundreds of people constructing fiber, spread across some pretty wide geographies, and so we'll have a lot of regional construction zones where we'll be hiring and training people to complete our fiber infrastructure.
Nice. And so you're kind of, if I'm understanding correctly, saying something along the lines of, the right tool for the right job. And you've studied the problem in a variety of different contexts. And there's a great question from TJ York. Can you talk a bit about the differences between your approaches in the rural and urban context when it comes, and he says specifically fiber to the premises, but I would open that up to all the different techniques and approaches that you're going to be using, knowing that I think we all agree that fiber to the premises wherever possible is the ultimate goal. And then, meanwhile, with the need to get folks online really quickly, like things that we can do to sort of forerun that. So we'd love for you to answer that one next.
Yeah, I love that question. RDOF really doesn't include much in terms of urban areas. Sort of by definition, urban areas are largely served. Doesn't mean we don't care about urban, because urban people count too, and even suburban. I'll say that we have a focus on maybe touching some suburban areas that are near our RDOF, and they are radically different. And so where I live in an urban area where the utilities are underground, and installing utilities adjacent to those existing utilities costs a lot of money. You have to locate the gas line, the water line, the sewer line, potentially the cable TV provider and the phone provider. That all costs a lot of money. And I think part of the I won't call it a misunderstanding, but there's a lot of chatter around how expensive it is to put in fiber. And I'll say that it is in certain areas. It's very expensive.
Okay.
For instance, where I live, it would be costly to add another set of infrastructure underground. These rural areas are not that. I sort of talked about the thousands of miles of gravel roads that I've driven over the last 12 years. There's no water lines. There's no sewer lines. There's no, in most cases, no buried electrical lines.
Interesting.
People are for the lion's share of our RDOF areas, if they have gas in their house, it's an LP tank sitting in their backyard that they pay someone to come fill a couple times a year. There's no, their gas line is 20 feet long from the LP tank to their house. And so it's a different cost structure when you're working in an urban area or a suburban area. It's also a different cadence of construction too. So if you think of what's involved in having to miss and find all those utilities, and inevitably you're going to hit a gas line and cause a ruckus and have to recover from that. That cadence is radically different in the rural areas. So costs, definitely a difference. Timing, definitely a difference. And also competitive markets. So, the economics of coming into an urban area with another fiber line competing with the incumbent broadband utilities is probably challenging. And I'm not saying people don't do it. Metronet, Ziply, those kind of companies are definitely doing builds in urban areas with some success. But they have density, so they have a lot more homes per mile than what we're looking at. The beauty of the rural areas is our lower cost structure sort of makes up for the lack of density. So I'm excited about the rural areas that we're going to be building out, just because we're going to be seeing a subsidy, but also the demand vector is going to be highly different than maybe being $10 cheaper than the competitor in an urban market. Now, one thing I'll expand on that a little bit, because we've done some of this. I think I've said I'm really bullish on wireless outside of our RDOF areas, and we've done some of that. We actually built one of the first Terragraph networks in New Hampton, Iowa, where we're offering gigabit over wireless. That's something a lot of people think can't be done, and it works. It's a technology with a specific use case. Like, you're not going to do it for miles out in the country, but in a dense area. And I study urban WISPs with some granularity to what they're doing, and it's fascinating. I found out about another urban WISP in Southern California. I know of a couple in Northern California, and WISP technology works in urban areas. And I think it really hasn't. You'll see reports in cable companies, SEC filings, talking about the threats of wireless as a competitor to them. I think that's real. I mean, I think they know that there is a competitive threat in urban areas from wireless technology. Even our handsets, right? Our mobile handsets are getting pretty good with 5G technology. So, not urban isn't our laser focus, but we're definitely going to play in that space.
I wish somebody would tell us here in San Francisco that that stuff's getting pretty good.
Well,
Still pretty crap.
Some
Yeah,
areas,
cool.
yeah.
That's really good, Corey. Thank you. So, let's switch gears a little bit. I have a random question for you. You live in Las Vegas, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. This is really important. Are you a Raiders fan?
I am not.
Okay.
My wife is a Southern California girl and is not a Raiders fan, and so I'm
Okay, good.
not really a football fan. We're
Just
hockey.
checking.
We're hockey people.
Okay, understandable. Yeah, and Corey, we've got a ton of good questions here in the list. I'm gonna keep going up the list. Uh, Drew asked, you were awarded more in RDOF funds than Elon Musk of SpaceX. He asks, do you plan to engage in a tweet storm with Elon, which is, I wouldn't recommend it because he's the dank meme overlord and really good at Twitter. But I have another question that's related to this, because when we first met and we started having conversations, Corey, you really struck me in the fact that like you drilled really deep and really specific into cost structure in a way that kind of reminds me of Elon Musk in the way he breaks down problems from first principles and thinks about like, well, if we did it this way we always do it, it's going to be roughly the same cost. But if we kind of recast, the incumbent structure and think about it from first principles, and what are the raw ingredients, and then how much would those cost? And then you talked about like the months that you spent going and lining up, scale access things. Like it was like the Rain Man of broadband, right? But instead of like phone numbers in a phone book, it was like line items in a bomb. So can you talk a little bit about your obsession with cost structure, and does that in any way like influence, and I don't want to be the one to break this to you, Corey, right? But you have some critics. I don't know if you know that or not, but you didn't hear from me if not. But you have some critics, and they tend to dwell on the idea that your award is impossible, it can't be done. But hearing you say what you say about rural versus urban and everything, it kind of makes me think something like, a lot of people are applying, incumbent cost structures, and in particular, like, predominantly urban models and maybe even legacy telco cost models onto a problem that you're saying is like, it's actually, it's different, it needs to be approached differently. So can you talk about that? Like, is that going to be a part of your success in getting these folks connected?
For sure, yeah, and all respect to other broadband providers in the industry. They've done some great things and continue to do it. But you're right. We definitely have a different thesis on cost structure and what it takes to build these networks. And there's just difference in engineering approaches. We have a competitor in one of our fiber footprints that has a single node for their GPON architecture. So every single fiber line comes from one spot. And, that's a fine construction method, but you end up needing, 572 count fiber as you're leaving the central office, or maybe even more than one of those, where, we have an approach that's a distributed network architecture with field cabinets and smaller count fiber. It's a different approach. It's a different thought process. You're still delivering gig or 10 gig or 100 gig out to the areas that you need it, but it's just a different network design. And there's pluses and minuses. I mean, you can have the engineering discussions. The Cybertruck's a great example. So I look at that truck and I realize that Elon didn't design it to look pretty. He designed it to make it cheap. And it consequently tough, but to build a Cybertruck, to take those flat sheets of 30X steel and build a truck, it's going to be crazy fast for them to do it, and it's going to be a crazy truck. Like it's going to be probably the strongest truck ever made for a consumer truck. But the design decisions were optimizing for rapidity of building and also cost. And it's going to haul freight down the road, or lumber, or kids. It's going to do the job that pickups do for people. Not as pretty, maybe, or as conventional as what
Well,
people would expect.
some people would say it's pretty.
A lot of haters. I talk to a lot of people that hate that truck, but in the same way, obviously, we know we have some critics and some folks that say it can't be done, but
I didn't want to be the one that broke it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple team members say, "Hold my beer," as a response to that, and that's obviously we're joking when we think that, but we're building fiber networks today. We know experientially what it's costing us to build fiber networks in quite rural areas. So we're not making numbers up. We're not pulling out of the air. This is experientially what we're building fiber for, and it is different. But I think to your point, it's the difference between urban and rural. There's a lot of difference between going down a rural county road than a dense urban area where there's a lot of obstacles and
Right.
a lot of delays, and delays cost money. And so it is markedly different.
Yeah, delays. That reminds me. We'll get into some more questions related to performance and the accountability and stuff that's coming up for you to do the work that the grant money will allow you to do. But Jessica is the new FCC chairwoman. She has this brilliant, I think it's brilliant, like remix of a Bushism, where she says something like "no child left offline." Right. And I think that's very powerful because, we work with a lot of folks that do, philanthropic work and education. And, it's really frustrating to hear that, there was already a gap between the broadband haves and have nots in the country, but COVID kind of accelerated it and forced it, what some describe as a digital canyon, right, between the haves and the have nots. And Jessica, if you're listening, this is interesting because, my understanding, Corey, is that you haven't received the award money yet. So you haven't actually been able to connect people. Right. But meanwhile, you could be out there connecting people. Right. And you said that you've done some of these deployments, for a fraction of the cost, and what they result in is good broadband, maybe not perfect broadband, but at least for now, it's good broadband. Right. And it's now. Right. And then there's this there's this other issue that it's sort of a wet blanket for a lot of folks, me included, but we quintupled the money supply in the United States of America in 2020. Right. And if history rhymes, and we can look at, nations that have done that in the past, that means that, we have at least rampant inflation, if not hyperinflation coming up. And that also, a corollary to that is, of course, that there is an exponential decay to the purchase power of the broadband grant money that we have set aside to solve this problem, right? So I have a question for you, Corey, and I don't know what LTD stands for, but can we rename your company to LFG? And
Okay,
let's go.
I'll buy it. Oh yeah, I like it. Yeah, I'll have to make some board minutes to that effect because I like it. Yeah, I mean, it's you bring up several great points. One is sort of the costs of building this, and if anything, it's going to make it more important to build cost effectively and build quickly and get this. That there's a syntax to this, right, where you get the money and you build it, and you have the time in between, but the demand vector is here. It is the hockey stick. So with COVID, our what we call our legacy company, our wireless company, saw tremendous immediate uptake. And I think we did some research to see where people were coming from. Were they switching from DSL competitors? Were they switching from hotspots? What were they coming from when they came to our broadband? It was interesting. They were coming from their phones. They were households that only had phones, internet. The cell phone was all they had. And I think if COVID did anything, it took maybe the estimate of 17% of rural households that didn't have broadband and took them into they need broadband. I think that that's maybe the one sort of ray of light of COVID is households have realized that for education reasons, for entertainment reasons, for being able to work reasons, they need real hardwired, and I'll include fixed wireless in there, because that is a hard wire coming into the house. But that type of broadband, I think, is a standard as much as clean water and electricity in 2021, and probably has been since the start of COVID.
Yeah, well said. Well said. And everybody that's listening, thank you all for what you're doing to get folks connected. And it's really important work that you're doing. I know, Corey, that's what you're trying to do too. Well, let's keep rolling, And I mentioned that you have some critics. But I would love to get into some questions, Corey, that deal with Corey Hauer. Corey, how are you going to do all the stuff that you need to do in order to get these people, access to the internet? What's the next step for you?
Well, I mean, we're building some fiber sort of pre-RDOF, running the training programs that we're going to be using to staff up our teams. And that obviously we'll do that at larger scale once the RDOF funds start flowing to us. And just yesterday, the FCC announced some additional what do they call their notice? Their public notice, their PN came out saying they're ready to authorize another group. So I don't think the FCC has authorized anyone large yet. I think the largest so far has been Windstream with a $250 million award. But the FCC is a hard lift, right? They're working through 417 provisional winners. My guess is they'll get to some of the larger awardees next year. But that's tea leaf reading on my part. But they did award over $1 billion in this latest round, so they're getting there.
Wonderful. When Drew asked a question about how are you going to deliver the performance required to meet your award criteria without spending multiples of grant winnings?
Well, I think that fiber is going to meet the criteria, right? We're going to be able to deliver the gig down 500 up with low latency that's required for RDOF. But in terms of how we're going to do it, we're going to build it quickly, and we're going to build it at economic capex rates. We're gonna use some new thinking to deploying rural fiber, and I say new. It's probably new to the industry. It's not new to us. We've been doing it for a bit now, but that is how we're going to do it. And it's how do you eat an elephant? Well, carve it up into individual bites, and our particular elephant is a number of regions. So that's also going to be our approach. We're not going to build the whole thing from one location. We're going to have regional offices, and we're going to bite off multiple elephants over the 6-year build out window.
So you're not daunted. It sounds. Your work is definitely cut out for you.
Yeah, it's big, right? Like you can't. I mean, I could minimize it. It's a big undertaking, but it's certainly something. We spent 11 years growing our fixed wireless footprint. Pedal to the metal the entire time, building 30 new tower sites a month for years, and that sort of cadence we're going to keep doing. We're going to keep building at a rapid rate, but we're going to be doing it in multiple areas at a time. So not just our Midwest footprint where we've been focused. We'll have teams in Colorado. We'll have teams in Texas. We'll have teams in Illinois.
You have a plan, and you're ready to rock once the funding rolls.
We are, yeah.
And the outcome is that you're able to get people connected in hard to connect areas.
It's, people come to work for LTD for, obviously it's a good paycheck and it's a good job, but there is a satisfaction when you go home at night and you've changed people's lives in a palpable way. And talking to my installers and my field techs and tower techs, like even the work they're doing right now, repairing storm damage, like it's pretty satisfying in knowing you're doing that sort of good. I'm sure the guys in the 30s, guys and gals in the 30s that were building rural electrical infrastructure, that didn't exist before, had the same feelings, right? I mean, my ancestors are from Northeast Iowa, and those areas, when they got power, it changed lives. Like you could farm past sundown because you had lights in the barn and you could go do things and work on equipment, and it changed the way that people lived in rural areas. I think in the same manner, this type of broadband that we're going to install with RDOF will be a game changer, because if you work for XYZ multinational, you're going to be able to potentially live in rural Southeast Missouri where you probably couldn't pre-COVID, but those rules have changed now. The companies are finding out that their workforces can be productive working remotely. So, I talk to county commissioners all over the country and different stakeholders, and they all get this. They have the people that are scooping up farmsteads in their rural counties, and they're working for these large multinationals, and it's changing the demographic of these rural areas. And I think in a positive way, because I think there's a bit of a chasm in our country between rural and urban, and maybe urban people don't understand rural people or vice versa. That we're going to be more of a melting pot potentially, I think, and broadband's going to enable some of that, some of those types of discussions to happen that probably haven't happened before.
That's a cool vision for the future, Corey. So we'll keep rolling. Adam Binder asked an interesting question. Can you comment on what the California PUC denying your ETC application yesterday means for LTD, and if you will appeal as you did in Iowa? And a follow-up is, how much of a setback for LTD are the CPUC and Iowa utilities for its decisions, and how concerned are you about other states like South Dakota?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we're obviously super disappointed with the California Public Utilities Commission, and I've hesitated to say things publicly, but I mean, they've fired their shots. Every single decision that CPUC made yesterday was done unanimously, which tends to lead me to believe they didn't read a lot of the things that they voted on. It's my guess, because I think if they had read what they voted on, they would have saw that it was pretty poor. Without getting into the specifics of it, it's a public document, you can read it, but it appears to me that for whatever reason, California is trying to prevent broadband from happening in their states. And not just referring to LTD broadband, but all of the other RDOF winners that didn't already hold what's called a CPNC in California. That's sort of like a CLAC authority in other states, but they call it a CPNC in California. Every single winner, including LTD broadband, has been a subject of a intentional 18-month delay in certifying ETC eligibility in California. And that's unique. They're the only state in the country that, in my view, isn't running a serious attempt to get RDOF funding going in their state. So there's no, if you didn't already hold the CPNC in California, you're not building RDOF, and you're not going to build it this year or next year because of the inbuilt delay. And in fact, one of the earlier decisions made by the California Public Utilities Commission was in regard to some of their programs that they're running for grants in California that overlap RDOF areas. And in general, RDOF areas have sort of been carved out from other federal grant funding so as not to subsidize an area with two different competitors and breaking the economics of those subsidy areas. California dismissed all of the companies that challenged those awards and said, you don't have your ETCs, which is ironic, because the reason they don't have their ETCs is because the California Public Utilities Commission hasn't done it. And so it's astounding
very
to me.
interesting.
And I love California as a state. We visit there often. I think that their CPUC is clearly dysfunctional, and we're absolutely going to appeal. You know,
Wow.
the areas in California that we want are very rural, and I wonder how much politics is involved in that. There may be some blue-red fights going on that we don't know about, but the reality is that there's a lot of need for broadband in the rural areas of California that were part of RDOF, not just LTD's award areas. And for CPUC to, by intent, delay all of this funding, I know they're trying to do state funding alongside that. Gavin Newsom has talked about a couple $2 billion for broadband, both last mile and state-run broadband in California.
Yeah.
But it's a subject I care about. I care about the rural Californians that are affected by this. And it's not just an LTD issue. I think I don't know why the national press, particularly the telecom press, hasn't picked up on this. I hope that they do. I think that this is an unknown issue to a lot of people, and to me it's quite sad.
Why? But why aren't they supposed to be helping folks get the utilities that they need?
I don't know. I wish I knew. To be honest, the administrative law judge that was assigned our ETC application, I guess I don't want to get too much into this specifics of the judge, but
it's
I'm a little bit astounded. My wife's an attorney. I mean, I know that you fight battles and you do the things you're going to do, but it very much feels like this ALJ and perhaps the CPUC is trying to railroad LTD out of California. And
interesting.
Yeah, it's astounding to me. And my other counsel that is working on our California legal work is astounded. It's not a great look for the CPUC and for this judge, to be honest.
Well, that gets into some interesting other questions. I had one from earlier, and then Joan Ingebretson, I'm sorry, Joan, if I mangled that, asked some really great questions. We're going to go into those real fast. And my question, Corey, to you is like, can you give us a sense of your thinking on, like, if the FCC hasn't awarded these places, and we now have, we're staring at like a tsunami of new broadband grants coming in, right? That in areas like there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt among RDOF winners. There's a lot of, confusion about like, is it going to be something that they're going to displace the RDOF subsidy, right? And the opposite is a concern too, that like, are they going to say, well, that place, that area won RDOF, and so therefore it doesn't qualify for IIJA money, the BEAD program, or any of the other programs? Like, do you have any knowledge of that, or do you have any thoughts on what's going on there? Is that a concern, or is that completely crazy? Because it seems like $42.5 billion for BEADs. Like, you could go in and double, triple down on those areas, right? Like, I guess I'd love to hear your thinking on that.
So it's interesting because there's a lot of discussion about broadband, and I think the first discussion is about availability, and we've probably all agree that universal broadband availability is a huge priority. Some political folks have come right behind that and said, well, not just availability, but affordability. Well, now that's a different conversation. Yes. Because if you're going to solve for both, you need probably 10x the money, because you're going to have a competitor to sort of deflate the market to a point where it's quote affordable. I think that there's certainly programs like the EBB program, and that's evolving to a new permanent program that are subsidizing broadband costs for low-income households. We participate in that program, and we'll participate in the future program. And I think it's a great idea, because I think that broadband affordability is an issue. But I think that subsidizing competition can be problematic, but I think it's 10x problematic if you're subsidizing multiple competitors in an area. And so my understanding is that the intent of the federal subsidies is to subsidize one area once, at least as things are written today. You know, there's definitely politicians that want to change that and subsidize every area twice.
Right.
That is what it is. You just be careful what you ask for. I think that would be my caution to those folks. You know, that I think, in my view, solve the access issue first. And if there's things you can do, like the EBB program, to solve affordability if that becomes the next problem. But I think the access issue is pretty clearly right in front of us and solvable. I think to your point, Chase, there's a ton of money that's been allocated. If we can't solve it with $9 billion in RDOF and $65 billion in BEAD funds, I would say the problem probably can't be solved. And I would also caution maybe the idea of overfunding, because now, you know, you talked about inflation. You could inflate up the costs of these projects to where they actually don't ever get done. And this is sort of, I say this a lot, that I don't think broadband is or should be a political issue. I think it's a quality of life standard issue. And as a group of ratepayers, in the case of RDOF funds, taxpayers in the case of BEAD funds, we ought to be able to solve it. And then, in my view, it probably shouldn't take, you know, 65 billion and 9 billion. I think it should be solvable for less. I'm not here to fight that battle. I'm just here to solve it in our small way. We're going to solve it for the RDOF areas that were awarded. And I think the other RDOF awardees are too. I think this is, you know, the FCC's run 3 reverse auctions now, and I'd say that they've run them well. I mean, the work that they've done to build a cost-effective solution for getting these areas served with broadband, the reverse auction, I think, you know, there are people that probably disagree with it, but I think it's been proven to be a successful mechanism for getting accountability, performance, and economic feasibility to deploying broadband.
That's a good attitude, Corey. Yeah, that brings us to Joan's question. Do you have a contingency plan if the FCC doesn't approve your long form application?
Well, I don't think that is a thing that's on the radar. The FCC has been very collaborative with us, and I think with other RDOF awardees that I've spoken to. I don't think the FCC's goal or job is to try to blow up RDOF. I don't hear that. I mean, there may be some upset competitors that hope that will happen. I don't see that in the cards. I think that the FCC wants RDOF, like CAF2, like the rural broadband experiments, to be successful and to check the boxes in these geographies where RDOF was awarded. I just don't see that as a goal for the FCC. They want the companies that are participating in it to succeed and complete the obligation.
Nice. So we have a few more minutes, Corey. I want to kind of, close it out with a quick note. Broadband money, the place we are right now, the service, it's all about helping local providers, right? Local networks, mom and pop ISPs, RECs, utilities, community networks, every flavor of approach, right, to solving this problem that Corey, you're talking about today, just to help those local folks get their share of grant money and of subsidies, right? So it's been an honor to get to hang out with you here, Corey. I'd like to wrap up with a couple more questions. One is, what's one thing that you would like the industry to know, right? And that could be straight to the haters. That could be, to the folks that are listening in from the various states where you won, and or even folks from the FCC that are sitting in on the call, or you know, whoever you want to talk to. It's just like, what's one thing you want them to know?
Well, I say this a lot when I speak at different venues. I've spoken before a number of task force that are related to broadband, and I think the biggest misunderstanding about broadband is an odd one, and you probably wouldn't think of it. It's where the weakest link is. And we're a pretty large operator. We support tens of thousands of customers. And what I mean by the weakest link is typically the in-home network. You know, even in Las Vegas, where we have relatively good internet, people perceive their internet to be bad because they don't have the right in-home networking equipment to deliver their good broadband to the nooks and crannies of their house, where they might be doing a Zoom call or doing something that's needing better broadband. And, you know, as a company, we focus like a laser on that. We're including that equipment and those solutions as part of our offering, because we realize that we're going to get blamed. If the broadband experience is bad, it's us. So we're owning that. And I think that, you know, I'm on calls all the time with people that have problems with Zoom, and you know, I have the conversation I'm having with you now right now, talking about the importance of getting robust Wi-Fi to all the devices. You know, I think that rightly or wrongly, the cable industry has done a great job of selling people on the idea that they need gig service to do a 3 meg Zoom call. It's not that you need 1,000 meg to do 3 megs of video streaming. It's that you need a robust path from your whatever your broadband is to get to your device, so your 3 meg Zoom call is reliable. That would be something that I if I could teach everybody that one thing, I think it's probably an aside to the real broadband issues that we're talking about in this call. But once you solve it, you have to solve it all the way to the device.
I love that. As the provider, you know, you're saying that you put on your own shoulders, not just getting to the house or the business or the farm or the barn or wherever people are getting their broadband these days, like inside of that premises, right? It's your responsibility as the provider. You're shouldering that as like the experience of the connected family or business, right? Am I hearing you correctly? You're saying that that's part of your duty as the provider, is to help them, you know, understand. So it's like, you know, grandma is like, I can't get the Wi-Fi, I can't watch my programs, you know, like Wheel of Fortune's not coming in. It's like, well, grandma, you know, the router's in a brick closet, you know, or this, you know, you're in a stucco. It's like there's a Faraday cage under that stuff. Like, you know, you need to move it. That's something that, you know, most providers probably don't tackle, but you're saying that's part of your job.
There's folks in the industry that will say, well, that's a revenue opportunity. You can upsell and you charge for the mesh router system or however you do it. And I think that the skepticism of the consumer is real, right? They think they're getting screwed and trying to make an extra $20 a month off them to provide the solution that should already be part of it. And I'm not saying the providers that want to charge money for that are wrong. I'm just saying it's whether you charge money for it or if you include it. To me, making sure the customer has the solution is as important as getting the broadband there. Because it doesn't do any good, right? Because if your weakest link is the very next link between you and your iPad or your PC, you may as well have bad broadband, because you do. I mean, if your home network solution is bad, you have bad broadband, regardless of how good your broadband is. It's bad for you.
That's awesome. Okay. We got one more minute. So one last question. This one's a good one. It's from Drew. It's, your critics worry that you'll squander the winnings. However, historically, incumbents who received grant funding did not spend much of it on broadband. At Ready and Broadband Money, we joke, you know, they spend it on other Bs, the bonuses, the buybacks, and the BS, right? So Drew's question is, what will you do differently?
Well, I think that the biggest thing is we'll actually go to the residences, and I won't name the company, but I've driven around California and I've seen all sorts of fiber along rural pole lines. And I go and I look at the name and I see who it is and I recognize it. And I realize that that fiber stops at not one house on that road. It literally goes to the cell tower and it goes to the school. And that's because that's where they bid and they won the big contract for the commercial service. And that's one of the companies that gets the money that you talked about. They've been getting ratepayer money for years to subsidize their networks in rural areas, but they don't stop at any of the houses on that road. So the reason that those areas are part of the RDOF award area is because of that. They just chose not to do it. And I think, our focus has largely been residential first. We focus as a company on unserved residential locations. We certainly have commercial customers and we value our commercial customers, but we've been a residential first focus. I think that the larger usual suspects, and particularly the legacy telcos, if they could find a private equity firm to buy their rural residential customers, they would sell them all tomorrow. And a lot of them have. You've seen some of the companies, divest of a lot of their residential facing infrastructure. I would say residences matter. I mean, they do. I mean, because residences are businesses too. You're working from your home. Is that a residence or is that a business? You have a small business in your home. Is that a residence or a business? I would say that it's as important to have residences have great broadband as it is to have great electricity.
It's also, where people live in many cases. In the end, it's about connecting people. So your point's taken, Corey. We're out of time. Folks that have joined, again, thank you for making time to connect. Thank you for what you're doing to help people get better access. And Corey, thank you so much for making time here to share with us and to help folks understand. So really appreciate you.
Yeah, Jace, thanks for having me. Thanks to you, Drew.
Well, we'll see y'all.